The battered Earth Defense Council chamber hummed with the faint buzz of static from holographic displays. Dim light from a flickering overhead panel cast uneven shadows on the faces of its occupants. The room smelled faintly of burnt circuitry and sweat, a constant reminder of the battles they'd barely survived. Captain Lila Voss leaned over the central console, her hands gripping its edge as she stared at the shimmering image of a Kelthar envoy. The alien's elongated form shifted with a fluid grace that belied the harshness of their words. "Humans," it began, its voice a silken monotone, "we have watched you struggle, watched your fleets burn against forces beyond your comprehension, and yet we offer salvation." Lila's jaw tightened, her piercing eyes narrowing at the creature's translucent visage. "Your idea of salvation looks suspiciously like a trap," she said coldly. The Kelthar envoy didn't flinch. Its shimmering eyes locked onto hers, their cold detachment unnerving. "A trap?" it echoed, almost amused. "The artifact we offer predates both our civilizations. Its power transcends understanding. We could have used it to end you long ago. Instead, we offer it freely, as a gesture of possibility." In the far corner of the chamber, Dr. Adrian Kane sat silently, observing the exchange. He adjusted his glasses, the cold metal of the frame pressing against his temple as his analytical mind churned. The mention of the artifact had already hooked him, though he kept his face carefully neutral. The Kelthar's arrogance was palpable, but there was something else, an undertone, almost imperceptible, of urgency. "Possibility," Adrian muttered under his breath. "More like plausible deniability if it fails." Lila glanced at him, her voice lowering. "Adrian, thoughts?" He stood, his movements deliberate, and approached the console. The holographic projection cast a pale blue light across his weathered features, highlighting the faint creases around his eyes. "The timing is convenient," he began, addressing the room rather than the alien. "The Kelthar dominate every front. Why offer us something that could level the playing field now, when they're winning?" "Because," the envoy interjected smoothly, "your extinction benefits no one. Annihilation is wasteful. This war need not end with your ruin." Adrian smirked, his skepticism sharp. "Spoken like conquerors who've overplayed their hand." The room fell silent, the weight of the decision pressing down on everyone. Finally, Lila exhaled, her voice a quiet growl. "We'll accept, but under strict conditions. If this is a trap—" The envoy's image flickered, the faintest hint of amusement crossing its alien visage. "If it were, Captain Voss, you would already be dead." The projection vanished, leaving only its words lingering in the charged air. The artifact arrived days later, its sleek metallic form encased in a containment field that shimmered faintly with restrained power. Adrian stood in the lab, his team of engineers and scientists buzzing around him, their voices blending into a low hum of anticipation and unease. The object was unlike anything they'd seen, a latticework of strange alloys that seemed to hum at a frequency just below hearing. "Fascinating," Arlen murmured from the doorway, his voice tinged with something Adrian couldn't quite place. The Kelthar defector was an enigma, his loyalty questioned by nearly everyone, but his knowledge invaluable. Adrian didn't turn. "What do you know about it?" Arlen hesitated, stepping into the room. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if navigating a minefield. "It is old," he said finally. "Older than the Kelthar. Older than you. It was found, not built. Its original purpose, lost to time." Adrian glanced at him, his sharp eyes narrowing. "And yet your people decided to give it to us? What aren't you telling me?" Arlen's expression was inscrutable, his alien features unreadable. "It will either save you," he said, his voice a quiet murmur, "or destroy you." Adrian's gaze lingered on him for a moment before turning back to the artifact. The lab's overhead lights reflected off its surface, creating shifting patterns that seemed to move with a life of their own. The air felt heavier here, the faint hum of the artifact resonating in Adrian's chest like an unspoken warning. "Start diagnostics," he ordered his team. "I want every detail mapped before we even think about testing it." Hours turned into days as the team worked tirelessly, their findings raising more questions than answers. The artifact's internal structure defied logic, its energy readings spiking unpredictably. Adrian pored over the data, the lines of code blurring as fatigue gnawed at his focus. "This doesn't make sense," one of his engineers muttered, running a hand through her disheveled hair. "The energy output, it's too volatile. It shouldn't even be stable." "Maybe it isn't," Adrian replied, his tone grim. Arlen stood at the edge of the room, his arms folded, watching silently. His presence was a constant reminder of the Kelthar's duplicity, his cryptic warnings gnawing at Adrian's resolve. "Anything to add?" Adrian asked, his frustration seeping into his voice. Arlen's gaze drifted to the artifact, his expression unreadable. "Your kind is resourceful," he said after a long pause. "But this is not a puzzle you can solve by force. It requires finesse." Adrian bristled. "You think we're incapable?" "I think," Arlen said slowly, "that you are capable of surprising even yourselves. But surprises can cut both ways." The words lingered, their weight pressing on Adrian as he turned back to the artifact. He could feel it now, the faint hum growing stronger, resonating not just in his ears but in his bones. It wasn't just an object. It was alive, in a way he couldn't explain. "Let's run one more test," he said finally, his voice steady despite the unease gnawing at him. The lab's systems came to life, their whirring and beeping creating a symphony of controlled chaos. The artifact's glow intensified, its hum shifting into a low, pulsing vibration that seemed to sync with Adrian's heartbeat. "Energy levels rising," one of the engineers reported, her voice tight. "We're approaching the threshold." "Hold it steady," Adrian ordered, his eyes locked on the readings. For a moment everything seemed stable. The artifact pulsed with a steady rhythm, its glow casting eerie patterns across the lab's walls. But then the readings spiked, alarms blaring as the artifact's energy output surged. "Shut it down!" Adrian shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The system responded sluggishly, the containment field flickering as the artifact's glow grew blinding. The air crackled with static, the faint smell of ozone filling the room as Adrian's team scrambled to regain control. Finally, the artifact dimmed, its hum fading into silence. The lab fell quiet, the only sound the ragged breathing of its occupants. "What the hell was that?" Lila demanded, storming into the room. Adrian turned to her, his expression grim. "A warning," he said. "This thing isn't just powerful, it's unstable." Arlen's voice broke the silence, his tone low and almost reverent. "It is not unstable," he said. "It is waiting." Adrian's gaze snapped to him, the words chilling in their simplicity. Whatever the artifact was, it wasn't done with them yet. The lab remained tense, the air thick with unspoken fears as Dr. Adrian Kane stood over the artifact. Its once blinding glow had dimmed, but the faint hum continued, low and resonant, vibrating through the metal floor and into his bones. Adrian's chest felt tight, as if the artifact's very presence was pulling the air from the room. He wiped sweat from his brow, the sharp scent of burnt circuits stinging his nose. "It's waiting," Arlen had said, his voice reverberating like a quiet storm in Adrian's mind. The alien defector leaned against the wall, his expression unreadable. Adrian turned to his team, their faces pale and drawn. "We're missing something," he said, his voice firm despite the gnawing uncertainty. "Run the energy diagnostics again. I want to know why it surged." One of the engineers, Marta, hesitated, her fingers hovering over the console. "It didn't just surge, Dr. Kane," she murmured, her voice shaky. "It responded. Like it knew what we were doing." Adrian's gaze sharpened. The artifact wasn't just a device. It was reactive, alive in ways that defied logic. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of data, but the picture remained maddeningly incomplete. Commander Lila Voss entered the lab, her boots striking the floor with deliberate authority. The metallic echo cut through the tense silence, drawing all eyes to her. "What's the status?" she demanded, her sharp tone leaving no room for evasion. Adrian looked up, meeting her steely gaze. "Unchanged," he admitted. "It's not just unstable. It's responsive. Whatever this thing is, it's more than a weapon. Lila folded her arms, her expression unyielding. We don't have the luxury of philosophical debates, Adrian. The Kelthar are regrouping. If we don't figure this out soon, they'll crush us. Adrian clenched his fists, the weight of her words pressing down like a vice. He turned back to the artifact, its faint glow casting distorted shadows across the room. We'll figure it out, he said, his voice low but resolute. As the team resumed their work, the lab filled with the sounds of whirring machinery and the soft clatter of keyboards. Adrian leaned over the console, his eyes scanning the data, searching for patterns in the chaos. The numbers blurred, his fatigue clawing at the edges of his focus. It's not responding to energy inputs, Marta said, her voice breaking the silence. But there's a spike every time we adjust the containment field. Adrian straightened, his mind sparking with possibilities. It's reacting to proximity, he realized. The field isn't just containing it, it's interacting with it. Arlen stepped closer, his tall frame casting a long shadow over the console. Your kind views this as a machine, he said, his tone soft but pointed. But it is more than that. It was designed to adapt, to learn. Adrian frowned, his frustration flaring. Then why does it feel like it's fighting us? Because it was never meant for you, Arlen replied, his voice tinged with something between pity and admiration. The words hung heavy in the air, and Adrian's mind raced. If the artifact was reacting to them, then it was possible they weren't just testing it. They were teaching it. But what was it learning? Run a proximity test, Adrian ordered, his voice cutting through the silence. Bring the containment field closer to its core, slowly. The team worked with careful precision, the hum of the artifact growing louder as the field tightened. The room vibrated, the sound resonating in Adrian's chest like the deep thrum of a massive engine. The artifact's glow intensified, casting eerie patterns of light and shadow across the walls. Energy levels spiking, Marta reported, her voice taut with tension. It's stabilizing? Adrian's heart pounded as the readings leveled out, the chaotic surges replaced by a steady, rhythmic pulse. The artifact was responding, its energy aligning with the containment field. Adrian, Lila's voice broke through, sharp with warning. You're playing with fire. I know, he replied, his eyes never leaving the artifact. But we're finally getting somewhere. The pulse quickened, the artifact's glow brightening until it was almost blinding. Adrian shielded his eyes, his breath catching as the light flickered, then coalesced into a shimmering holographic image. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on the projection. It was a map, stars and planets suspended in a vast three-dimensional grid. But it was incomplete, fragments of data missing, the image flickering like a fractured memory. What is this? Marta whispered, her voice barely audible. A map, Adrian said, his voice hushed. But to what? Arlen stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the projection. Not a map, he said, his tone grim. A key. The revelation sent a chill through Adrian. The artifact wasn't just a weapon. It was a tool for something far greater, something the Kelthar hadn't told them. What does it unlock? Lila demanded, her voice tight with urgency. Arlen hesitated, his gaze shifting to Adrian. The power to destroy, he said finally, or the power to create. The choice will be yours. The words struck Adrian like a hammer, the weight of their implications pressing down on him. The Kelthar had given them this weapon not as a gift, but as a gamble. They wanted humanity to fail, to destroy themselves in their desperation. Adrian's mind raced, the pieces falling into place. The surges, the instability. It wasn't a flaw. It was a test. The artifact was waiting for them to prove they could wield it. We're not done yet, he said, his voice steady but determined. Run a full analysis on that map. If it's a key, I want to know what it unlocks. The team worked in silence, their focus razor sharp. The lab buzzed with energy, the faint hum of the artifact blending with the rhythmic clatter of keyboards. Adrian watched the projection, his thoughts a storm of questions and possibilities. As the analysis progressed, the map began to take shape, the missing fragments filling in like pieces of a puzzle. But the more they uncovered, the more the truth eluded them. "Adrian," Marta said suddenly, her voice breaking the silence. "There's something else." The projection shifted, the map dissolving into a series of symbols, intricate flowing patterns that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. "What are we looking at?" Lila asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Language," Adrian replied, his eyes narrowing. "But not ours, and not the Kelthar's." The mystery deepened, the artifact's secrets only partially revealed. Adrian felt the weight of its presence, the hum resonating in his chest like a heartbeat. "It's waiting," Arlen said softly, his voice a quiet echo of his earlier warning. Adrian stared at the symbols, his resolve hardening. Whatever the artifact was, it was far more than the Kelthar had let on. And if humanity was going to survive, they would have to uncover its truth, no matter the cost. The artifact's holographic symbols danced in the dim light of the lab, casting rippling patterns across the walls. Adrian Kane's gaze was locked on the display, his mind racing to decipher the alien script. The hum of the artifact pulsed steadily now, as though it had awakened and was waiting for something, or someone, to meet its expectations. The cold air of the lab prickled against Adrian's skin, the faint metallic tang of ozone lingering from the artifact's earlier surge. Marta leaned closer to her console, her voice tight with tension. "These symbols aren't static. They're changing, reacting to something." Adrian stepped closer, his fingers brushing the edge of the holographic field. The cool glow bathed his face, and he felt a faint vibration through his fingertips, as if the artifact were alive. "It's evolving," he murmured, "adapting to us. It's not just a key, it's learning." "Learning what?" Commander Lila Voss's voice cut through the room, sharp and unyielding. She stood with her arms crossed, her piercing eyes locked on Adrian. "And how much longer do we have before it decides we're not worthy?" Adrian turned to her, the weight of her words settling over him like a storm cloud. "We don't have that answer yet," he admitted, his voice low. "But if we don't figure it out, the Kelthar might not need to attack us. This thing could destroy us from the inside." Arlen, the Kelthar defector, stepped forward from the shadows. His alien features were cast in an eerie light by the artifact's glow, his elongated frame giving him an almost spectral presence. "It is not destruction the artifact seeks," he said, his voice calm but laden with warning. "It is understanding, but if you misuse it, it will not hesitate to protect itself." Adrian's frustration bubbled to the surface. "If you know so much, why don't you tell us what it's protecting?" Arlen hesitated, his gaze fixed on the artifact. "It is not mine to reveal," he said finally. "But I can tell you this. The Kelthar feared it. That is why they sabotaged it before giving it to you." The words hit Adrian like a physical blow. "Sabotaged how?" "The data they provided was incomplete," Arlen explained. "A deliberate fracture in its design. They hoped your attempts to repair it would trigger its destruction." Adrian clenched his fists, his mind churning with anger and disbelief. The Kelthar hadn't just handed them a weapon. They'd handed them a ticking time bomb. Every calculation, every adjustment they'd made, had been based on a lie. "We've been flying blind," Marta said, her voice shaking. "Every test, every surge. It's all been a reaction to their tampering." Lila stepped forward, her voice a low growl. "And yet it's still working. The artifact hasn't destroyed us yet. Why?" Adrian turned back to the holographic display, his gaze narrowing. "Because it's waiting for us to correct their mistakes," he said. "It's giving us a chance to prove we're capable of understanding it. And if we fail—" The unspoken threat hung in the air, heavier than the artifact's hum. Adrian's mind raced as he studied the symbols, each one shifting and morphing into new forms. He could feel the artifact's presence, a quiet but insistent force pressing against his thoughts. It wasn't just a puzzle to be solved. It was a test of humanity's ingenuity and resilience. We need to strip the Kelthar's programming from it, he said finally, his voice steady, despite the storm of uncertainty within him. Reset it to its original state. Marta's eyes widened. That could destabilize it completely. If we're wrong, if we do nothing, it'll destroy us anyway. Adrian interrupted, his tone firm. We've come this far. We can't back down now. Arlen stepped closer, his voice low but resolute. If you do this, there is no turning back. The artifact will judge you, not just your actions, but your intentions. Adrian met his gaze, the weight of his decision pressing down like a tidal wave. Then we'd better make sure we're ready to be judged. The lab buzzed with activity as the team prepared for the reset. Every movement was precise, every command executed with unrelenting focus. Adrian worked alongside Marta, their fingers flying over the consoles as they stripped away layers of corrupted data. The artifact's hum grew louder, its light shifting from a soft blue to a deep, pulsating crimson. It's reacting, Marta said, her voice taut with tension. Energy levels are spiking again. Hold it steady, Adrian replied, his voice calm but commanding. We're almost there. The room vibrated as the artifact's energy surged, the faint smell of ozone thickening in the air. Adrian's heart pounded as he entered the final command, his breath hitching as the holographic display flickered and dissolved. For a moment the room was silent, the artifact's glow fading to a dim pulse. Then, without warning, it erupted in a brilliant cascade of light and sound. The holographic map returned, fully formed this time, its intricate details revealing a network of stars and pathways unlike anything Adrian had ever seen. It's beautiful, Marta whispered, her voice trembling with awe. Adrian stared at the map, his mind struggling to comprehend its vast complexity. It wasn't just a map, it was a blueprint, a design for something far greater than a weapon. Arlen stepped forward, his voice hushed. This is what the Kelthar feared, he said. The artifact is not just a tool of destruction. It is a key to creation, a force that can reshape the galaxy. Adrian's chest tightened as the enormity of their discovery sank in. The artifact wasn't just a weapon. It was a test of humanity's potential, a chance to prove they were worthy of wielding such power. But with that power came a choice, to use it for destruction or for something greater. We have to be careful, Adrian said, his voice steady but firm. The Kelthar wanted us to fail, to destroy ourselves with this. But if we can master it, we can end this war. Lila nodded, her expression resolute. Then let's make sure they never see it coming. The team worked through the night, their focus unwavering as they prepared the artifact for its first true test. Adrian could feel the weight of their responsibility pressing down on him, but he refused to falter. As the artifact's glow intensified, its hum growing louder and more insistent, Adrian knew they were on the brink of something extraordinary. But as he stared into the heart of the artifact, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, that the true test was yet to come. And somewhere in the darkness, the Kelthar were watching, waiting for humanity to stumble. The dim light of the war room glinted off the polished steel table as Commander Lila Voss traced a finger across the holographic projection of the Kelthar fleet. The pale blue display flickered slightly, illuminating the weary faces of the Earth Defense Council. The air was heavy with tension, the faint hum of the artifact's containment field thrumming through the walls like a heartbeat. Dr. Adrian Kane stood at the head of the table, his face illuminated by the hologram. His glasses reflected the glowing light, but his eyes were fixed on the intricate web of stars and pathways projected above the artifact's surface. Every detail, every flicker of the hologram seemed to whisper of the artifact's potential. "We can't wait any longer," Adrian said, his voice firm despite the storm of doubt raging within him. "The Kelthar know we've activated the artifact. It's only a matter of time before they strike." Lila leaned forward, her sharp gaze piercing. "You've been studying this thing for weeks. Tell me, Adrian, can we use it to fight back? Not hypothetically, can we actually win?" Adrian exhaled slowly, his fingers brushing the edge of the table. The cool metal grounded him as he spoke. "The artifact isn't just a weapon. It's a precision system. It can create controlled gravitational anomalies, localize black holes, If we deploy it strategically, we can dismantle their fleet without endangering our own." A murmur rippled through the room, a mix of awe and trepidation. Marta, seated near the edge of the table, glanced at the hologram, her voice barely above a whisper. "Controlled black holes? You're talking about wielding forces that could destroy entire star systems." "We're not aiming for star systems," Adrian said, his tone sharp. "We're targeting ships, specific points in their formation. The artifact's output is precise enough to collapse their engines or shred their shields without collateral damage, but it has to be deployed perfectly." Lila crossed her arms, her expression unyielding. "And if it's not?" "Then we lose," Adrian admitted, the weight of his words settling over the room like a lead blanket. The silence was broken by Arlen, who stepped forward from the shadows. His tall, slender frame cast a long shadow across the table, his alien features bathed in the pale glow of the hologram. "The Kelthar will not expect this," he said, his voice calm but insistent. "They see you as children playing with fire. They do not believe you capable of mastering it." Lila's gaze shifted to Arlen, her skepticism evident. "And you? Do you think we can master it?" Arlen tilted his head, his translucent eyes meeting hers. "I think you must." Adrian turned back to the hologram, his mind racing. The artifact had proven its potential, but activating it in battle would be an entirely different challenge. The Kelthar fleet was vast, its formation meticulously arranged to overwhelm and intimidate. Humanity's fleet, by contrast, was a fraction of its size, outnumbered, outgunned, and desperately clinging to hope. "We'll deploy from the asteroid belt," Adrian said, his voice steady as he outlined the plan. "The Kelthar won't expect an attack from such a confined space. Our ships will stay cloaked until the artifact is fully charged. Once it's ready, we'll use its gravitational anomalies to neutralize their flagship and disable their command relays. Without centralized coordination, their fleet will fall into disarray." Marta frowned, her brow furrowed. "And what happens if they detect us before it's ready? Their long-range sensors could pinpoint our position in seconds." "That's why we'll use decoys," Adrian replied, his mind already calculating the details. "We'll deploy a network of drones to create false energy signatures across the system. The Kelthar will waste time chasing phantoms while we prepare the real strike." Lila nodded, her lips curving into a faint, determined smile. "Simple, efficient, and just reckless enough to work. I like it." Adrian's lips twitched in a faint smile, though his chest still felt heavy with the weight of the mission. "It's a gamble," he admitted, "but it's our best shot." The war room buzzed with activity as the council finalized the plan. Adrian's team worked tirelessly to integrate the artifact into the fleet's systems, calibrating its output with meticulous precision. The lab was a symphony of whirring machinery, glowing monitors, and the steady hum of the artifact as it pulsed with latent power. "Containment field is stable," Marta reported, her voice edged with fatigue but laced with determination. "Gravitational flux is holding within safe parameters." Adrian nodded, his eyes fixed on the data streaming across the monitor. "Keep it steady," he said. "We can't afford any instability once we're in the field." As the hours stretched into days, the fleet moved into position, their cloaked ships drifting silently through the asteroid belt. The vast expanse of space was eerily quiet, the distant glimmers of starlight casting faint shadows across the jagged rocks. Adrian stood on the bridge of the Resolute, the flagship of humanity's fleet. The artifact was housed in a secure chamber deep within the ship, its energy feeding into the vessel's systems like a second heartbeat. He could feel its presence even here, a faint but insistent hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. "Fleet is in position," Lila reported, her voice calm but firm, all ships cloaked and holding steady. "Decoy drones are deployed," Marta added from her station. "Energy signatures are live. The Kelthar are already scanning." Adrian stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the holographic display of the battlefield. The Kelthar fleet was a wall of shimmering light, their shields glowing faintly as they moved into formation. He could almost feel their confidence, their arrogance, radiating across the void. "They think we're hiding," he said quietly. "Let's show them we're not." The artifact's hum grew louder, its energy building as the containment field tightened. The air on the bridge seemed to vibrate with anticipation, every crew member holding their breath as the countdown began. "Artifact charge at 75%, Marta reported, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "Targeting systems online." Adrian's chest tightened as he watched the Kelthar fleet draw closer, their formation tightening like a noose. This was it, the moment they'd been preparing for. "Charge complete," Marta said, her voice breaking the silence. "We're ready." Adrian turned to Lila, his gaze steady. "Fire!" The artifact unleashed its power in a burst of blinding light, the gravitational anomaly ripping through the void with silent precision. The Kelthar flagship shuddered, its shields collapsing as the anomaly tore through its core. The smaller ships around it scattered, their formation breaking as chaos rippled through the fleet. On the bridge of the Resolute, the crew erupted into cheers, but Adrian's focus remained sharp. The artifact's hum had shifted, its energy fluctuating as it prepared for the next strike. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the battlefield. "Not yet." The Kelthar fleet was in disarray, but their desperation made them dangerous. As Adrian prepared for the next move, he couldn't shake the feeling that the artifact's true test was still to come. The Kelthar flagship's massive hull drifted in the void, a broken leviathan of gleaming metal now fractured and vulnerable. Sparks danced across its surface where shields once shimmered like a second skin. The artifact aboard the Resolute thrummed with power, casting a faint glow that seemed to pulse in time with Adrian Kane's heartbeat. On the bridge, the air was electric, the crew poised on the knife's edge between triumph and ruin. Adrian stared at the tactical display, his fingers gripping the edge of the console. The gravitational anomaly they had unleashed had done its job, collapsing the Kelthar flagship's defenses and plunging their fleet into disarray. Yet the artifact hummed louder now, almost insistent, as though aware that its work was far from over. "Report," Adrian ordered, his voice cutting through the tense silence. Commander Lila Voss turned from her station, her face set in grim determination. "The Kelthar flagship is crippled. Their command relays are down, and their fleet is scattering, but their secondary vessels are regrouping near the outer ring." Her eyes flicked to Adrian, sharp and unyielding. "If we don't finish this now, they'll regroup and counterattack." Marta's voice trembled as she spoke from her station. "Artifact energy levels are fluctuating. It's stable, but it's like it's waiting for something." Adrian's chest tightened. The artifact wasn't just a weapon. It had always been more than that, responsive, adaptive, alive in some unknowable way. It had chosen them in a sense, but now it demanded something in return. "We don't need to finish this with annihilation," Adrian said, his voice low but steady. He turned to Lila, his gaze unflinching. "We've shown them what we're capable of. That's enough." Lila's expression hardened. "Enough? They've slaughtered billions. If we let them regroup, they'll come back stronger." Arlen, the Kelthar defector, stepped forward, his translucent eyes reflecting the artifact's glow. "Your commander is right," he said, his tone measured but firm. "The Kelthar will not see this as mercy. They will see it as weakness." Adrian faced Arlen, his voice rising. "And what would you have us do? Wipe them out? Become the very thing we're fighting against?" The room fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. Adrian turned back to the holographic display, his mind racing. The artifact pulsed steadily now, its glow casting long shadows across the walls. It felt like it was watching, waiting for humanity to decide its fate. "They're fractured," Adrian said finally. "Disoriented. If we hit their command ships, the rest of the fleet will fall apart, but we don't need to destroy them. We just need to end this." Lila's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "Your call, Adrian. But if this backfires—" "It won't," Adrian said, his voice firm. "It can't." The crew moved with precision, their movements a seamless choreography of determination and fear. The artifact's power built steadily, its hum rising to a crescendo as the final coordinates were locked in. Adrian stood at the heart of it all, his focus unshakable as the weight of the decision pressed down on him like gravity itself. "Ready to fire," Marta said, her voice taut with tension. Adrian stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the glowing display of the Kelthar fleet. His hand hovered over the console, the final command just a breath away. He turned to Lila, his voice steady. This isn't just about survival. It's about what we become after this. Lila met his gaze, her expression softening for the briefest moment. Then let's make sure we become something worth fighting for. Adrian pressed the command. The artifact's hum rose to a deafening pitch, the light from its core flooding the room in a brilliant cascade. The gravitational anomaly tore through the void, precise and devastating, collapsing the Kelthar command ships in an instant. The rest of their fleet fell into chaos, their remaining vessels scattering like leaves in a storm. The silence that followed was deafening. The holographic display showed the remnants of the Kelthar fleet retreating, their once formidable armada reduced to fractured remnants. Adrian exhaled slowly, his hands trembling as he stepped back from the console. It's done, Marta said softly, her voice tinged with disbelief. The crew erupted into cheers, the weight of their victory crashing over them like a tidal wave. But Adrian remained silent, his gaze fixed on the artifact. Its glow had dimmed, its hum fading into a soft, steady pulse. It felt satisfied, as though it had judged them and found them worthy. Arlen stepped closer, his voice a quiet murmur. You spared them. Adrian turned to him, his expression unreadable. Because we're not them. Lila approached, her voice cutting through the moment of reflection. Message from the Kelthar flagship, she said, her tone cautious. They're requesting parley. Adrian's eyebrows rose. Parley? They know they've lost, Lila said, but they don't understand why you didn't destroy them. Adrian nodded slowly. Patch them through. The holographic display shifted, the flickering image of the Kelthar fleet replaced by the visage of their leader. His angular features were twisted with confusion and something that might have been fear. Human, the Kelthar leader said, his voice strained. Why did you spare us? Adrian stepped forward, his voice calm but unwavering. Because we're not conquerors. We don't destroy for the sake of destruction. We protect what's ours, but we don't take what isn't. The Kelthar leader's eyes narrowed. Mercy is weakness. Mercy, Adrian said, his voice rising, is strength, and you would do well to remember that. The connection cut abruptly, the Kelthar leader's face disappearing from the display. The silence that followed was heavy, the crew exchanging glances as they processed what had just transpired. Lila turned to Adrian, her voice quiet. You think they'll honor that? Adrian's gaze remained fixed on the empty display. They don't have a choice, not anymore. The artifact's glow faded further, its energy stabilizing as it settled into dormancy. Adrian felt its presence recede, the faint hum a distant echo in the back of his mind. It had tested them, challenged them, and in the end, it had allowed them to prove themselves. As the crew began to regroup, the Resolute drifting among the shattered remnants of the battlefield, Adrian stepped away from the console. He gazed out the viewport, the vast expanse of stars stretching before him. This isn't the end, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. It's just the beginning. Lila approached, her voice soft but firm. We've earned this, Adrian. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Adrian nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. Humanity had been tested, pushed to the brink of annihilation, but they had emerged stronger, not because of their power, but because of their choices. The galaxy would remember this day, and so would he.